Okay, hello booktube, Aaron here, hope you're doing okay. Today I'm going to be looking at what I read in the month of June and then looking forward to July and also looking even further forward because there are 2 months where there's some specific things that I want to read, but I'll get to them at the end of the video and I'll focus on June for the time being. June was a really good month for reading. I think I finished 8 books, which is definitely above average for me. I'm quite a slow reader, and that was mainly because it's kind of bittersweet. In the last couple of weeks of June, I tested positive with COVID, so I was in the house for the whole time. So when I wasn't sitting around feeling sorry for myself, I was doing a lot of reading, and it was good. It was a good way to fill up that time and to keep my give me something to think about, I suppose. So it was really fun, even though I was sick. And so the first thing I'll start off with here is Lord of the Rings. I finished off Lord of the Rings. Something I started right at the beginning of the year, and I got distracted. And then in the last month or so, I just made a conscious effort to get back to Lord of the Rings. So I finished off the Two Towers. I found the whole sort of part with Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli and all the stuff from Rohan. I found that to be less effective as those sections are in the films. But then when you get back to Sam and Frodo, it's actually I thought it was actually stronger than it is in the films. That's just sort of my take. And then I finished off Lord of the Rings with Return of the King, and I finished this actually on the day I tested positive because I had about half of the book to go, and I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere today, so I just sat down and finished it, and that was really, really good. And again, there was sort of a mix of some things I thought were much, much stronger in the book, and then a few things that actually benefited from being shown in film. And I think generally for me, Lord of the Rings gets gradually worse as it goes on, but by the end of that point, it's not bad at all. It's still really, really good. But for me, I prefer actually lower stakes, not because I find massive stakes and massive armies and massive battles too much, but it's just I don't know. I invest more into it when the stakes are smaller, which is interesting. I didn't really see that in myself before revisiting Lord of the Rings. Then on to something a bit different, but equally delightful. I read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and this was, I think, the first Virginia Woolf I've read, or at least the first I can remember. And it was, really, really good, just great writing. I was just, quite happy to follow along and jump from head to head. It kind of, jumps between characters as it goes through, and that didn't really confuse me. I was quite happy to go along with that. As I said in a past video, I found the character of Septimus, who he's a character who fought in the First World War and is dealing with trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. And he just really resonated with me as a character, and the sections with him were my favourites, and I found the most interesting. But there was plenty of good stuff throughout. Then I've got a little wad of poetry here, and so earlier in the month I finished off Edwin Wyer's Selected Poems. Don't really hear him talked about that much, at least for his poetry. He's famous for him and his wife translated Kafka into English. That's what he's sort of more known for, and he's got a great poem in there sort of dedicated to Kafka, which is one of the stronger ones actually. Then we've got some Kaveh Akbar, so one of my favourite contemporary poets, in my top 5 definitely, and his most recent collection, Pilgrim Bell, which I think came out last year. And very, very solid. He's just doing what he does well, just leaning into his territory, dealing with just his identity, his own past, whether that's his family or sort of his addiction or sort of elements of his personality that he's had to deal with and battle with, and then that's sort of contrasted with the divine and with this sort of this kind of hope and looking outwards, I suppose. And so yeah, it's very good, very refreshing, and yeah, it's good to know that he's still doing his thing. And then I read another collection by one of my favourite living poets. This was Memorial by Alice Oswald, and it's essentially, she describes it as being an excavation of the Iliad. So she's kind of writing through the Greek, and she's just presenting the death scenes or the instances of death in the Iliad. She's naming the person, saying how they die, and then she's sort of pushing the similes that Homer used, and trying to really just sort of get at what was behind them. Quite often that's quite pastoral in its imagery, lots of images from the natural world to sort of convey something of what this body falling to the ground is like, or what the person coming to kill this person is like, and stuff like that. But it was a really, really good stellar read, and I think even if you haven't read the Iliad before, I think that there's something there that can grab you and keep you going. And then I read Murder in the Cathedral, which is a play by T.S. Eliot. And my thoughts on this were mixed, actually. It was kind of middling for me. He's really going for that Greek tragedy kind of vibe, and he's telling the story of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered by some knights because essentially he'd had in the past a bit of a falling out with the king, and actually at the time when these knights had come to kill him, the king had actually, I believe, agreed to pardon him, but just the message hadn't got across in time, and so these knights think that they're sort of helping the king out, and he's killed in the cathedral, and I found that he's going for this Greek tragedy thing, but just not quite hitting the mark, and then there's this bit after Thomas Becket's been killed, and the knights are trying to justify themselves, and that just felt really tacked on and really silly. They're talking directly to the audience, which is fine. I think there are instances, like definitely the chorus, they're definitely talking straight to the audience all the way through. But yeah, it just felt so tacked on and artificial. But then, it's T.S. Eliot, so there are going to be bits that are just wonderful. And I thought I'd share with you one of them. This is, I think, the most famous section from this play, but it's just really, really sublime. So this is Thomas. He knows he's going to die. The knights are trying to get into the cathedral, and they've barred the door, and he's trying to convince the priest to open up the doors, and what will happen will happen. So this is what he's saying. Peace, and be at peace with your thoughts and visions. These things had to come to you, and you had to accept them. This is your share of the eternal burden, the perpetual glory. This is one moment, but know that another shall pierce you with a sudden, painful joy when the figure of God's purpose is made complete. You shall forget these things, toiling in the household. You shall remember them, droning by the fire, when age and forgetfulness sweeten memory, only like a dream that has often been told and often been changed in the telling. They will seem unreal. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. And yeah, it's just great. I think the best bit for me is this other moment, which shall pierce you with a sudden painful joy. I think that's just wonderful. And so yeah, this was middling for me, but I appreciated moments like that where T.S. Eliot is just doing what he does well. And then changing things up quite a bit now. There's something that me and my wife do at Christmas. at Christmas, we swap books. So she'll give me a book that she's enjoyed, and I'll give her a book that I've enjoyed, or an author that I like. And yeah, it's just fun just to share things in that way, and yeah, it's good to sort of shake up your reading habits. But we found that once a year just isn't enough, so we thought we'd do it at the mid-year as well. So we did it at the end of June, and she gave me Cotillion by Georgette Heyer. So this is a classic Regency romance from the 1950s. And it was quite fun actually. That there were towards the middle, after we've had the setup, there were scenes where I was like, oh, why am I reading this? But then at the end, it just all comes together, and you realise, oh, okay, that's why I was reading this. And it's quite a funny ending. The setup is essentially this old guy who's taken in a friend's daughter after his friend's died. Sort of taking her on as a stepdaughter. And he's getting on, so he's written up his will and he's presenting it ahead of time so that the living relatives know how the inheritance is going to work. And essentially, he's going to give it all to his stepdaughter on the condition that she marries one of his great nephews. And he's called his great nephews in, and only some of them have turned up. And they're not a very unlikely bunch. And essentially, she's concocting a plan to ward off matrimony for as long as she can, and we're kind of finding out why she might want to stall a little bit. So it was fun. It was good to shake things up. I might try and read a bit more, Regency romance in the future, just to shake things up because it's quite fun, and it was a nice warm up for Jane Austen July as well. So it was lots of fun. And then I also picked up some Borges for the first time in quite a long time. I say that probably only a few weeks, but a long time for me in Borges. And I read some stories from his collection, The Aleph, in the collected fictions. And the stories were The Immortals, which might be one of my favourite Borges stories now. And I also read a story called The Dead Man, which was pretty good, although I don't feel like I quite get it yet, so I might revisit it at some point. So that's sort of an overview of my reading, although some of the things I'll be reading in July are things sort of left over from June. But I'll start off for July with Jane Austen July, and I'm going to be reading the one Jane Austen book from her 6 major novels I haven't read yet, and that's Mansfield Park. And I'm more or less going into it blind. I've never seen a adaptation of this. I've never really heard too many people talking about it. I've heard from a couple of people that it's a bit hit and miss with Jane Austen fans, so we'll see how it goes, but I'm looking forward to going in blind with it, and I really like the cover, even if it might give the impression that it's maybe like a Spanish surrealist book rather than a book from Regency England. But I'm really looking forward to it, and I haven't started it yet, but I'll be getting to it soon. And then, as I've said before, the undercoat to my reading at the moment, and will continue to be for quite some time, is Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. I'm reading it really, really slowly, and I'm nearly done with the first volume, Swan's Way, and I'll be starting the second volume, which is, I think, Within a Budding Grove. Is that right? Does it even say? But I've been really enjoying Proust. The first volume I'm in at the moment has been a reread for me. I tried reading it a few years ago and got through it and just decided to put Proust aside for a bit. So I came back to it and I've really discovered his humour. I didn't really get it the first time round. I think you have to just be patient and get onto his wavelength before it stands out to you. Because it's not like laugh out loud funny. It's more just noticing these little tics and personality things that you might recognise in yourself or in people you know and love. So that there's that kind of togetherness in humour that I quite liked. I've also been reading the Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, and this is a book that I've been wanting to get to for quite a while, and I thought I'll just start it, and again read it quite slowly, not quite as slowly as Proust. So I tend to read a fair bit, a nice little block, and then I'll pick something else up, and then I come back to it. So I've got up to chapter 5, and I'm going to leave it while I read Mansfield Park, and then I'll finish it off after Mansfield Park. And then I've been reading some Baudelaire. I've been reading the Flowers of Evil. I've never read, I've read some bits and bobs from Baudelaire, but I've never read the Flowers of Evil. And this is translated by someone. Doesn't actually say on the back. It is translated by James McGowan. And I've got a few little issues with the translation, but I might get back to you on that once I'm doing my wrap up for next month. But on the whole, Baudelaire's pretty fun. And that's all I really have planned for July. There might be some other bits and bobs coming up, but that's all I'm laying down for the time being. I'm sure it's more than enough to keep me busy. So now I'll get on to some things that I want to do later on this year. I suppose the first one was definitely a reading event, and a reading event I really wanted to join in on last year, but couldn't because all my books were in boxes and I got distracted with other things, and that's Shake-Tember. And I really want to get a slightly better acquaintance with his sonnets. I read them a few years ago and want to reread them. So I want to read this. This is his complete sonnets and poems, and just get to know them better. I'll read a couple of plays as well, I suppose, but I haven't made my mind up on them yet, and I'll probably make my mind up by the time I'm doing my TBR for September. But I also want to read some works by another author whose name begins with an S, and that's W.G. Sebald, and I've got here Vertigo and Austerlitz, and ideally I'd like to read both of these, but we'll see how it goes. One of my favourite things about a Sebald book before you've read it is all of these, you flick through and you see all these black and white photos that apparently with these black and white photos you'd get the photo and then he'd photocopy it, and then he'd photocopy the photocopy to make it just grainier and just a bit more eerie and indistinct. So I'd like to read both of these if I can, on top of the Shakespeare sonnets and maybe a couple of plays. And I've already said I want to be reading some James Joyce. I want to reread Dubliners and read The Story of the Dead on Christmas Eve. But then I want to read some Dostoevsky, because I've never read any Dostoevsky, and he's kind of like the white whale on my bookcase that I really want to get to. So I want to read at least one of these, but ideally both. We'll see how I do. I want to read The Idiot, which is the one that's been on my shelf the longest, but I also really want to read, or at least start, the Karamazov brothers in December. So I want to do a Dostoevsky December, which I'm sure I haven't coined that. I think I've seen that around, some other people doing that. And it seems like a good time of the year to be doing a big, or a couple of big Russian novels. So there we go. That's everything I want. Everything I read in June, everything I want to read in July, and then a couple of other things for the second half of the year. I hope I haven't been rambling on too long. I'm not sure how long I've been filming, but it's probably been too long. But thank you for dropping by, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.